If you find you're unsettled listening today, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com and click on resources.
We are men in the trades, forging health in the drug poisoning crisis. This is
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk.
Thanks for joining us for the Season 3 sampler of Off the Clock Toolbox Talk, a curious mix of Season 3 clips with music to keep your day moving along. The Season 3 sampler is sometimes funny, sometimes thought-provoking, and sometimes it gets real fast. Trigger warning is that loss of loved ones to overdose and suicide are mentioned along the way. First up, we have Shawn and Daniel from Shawn's story.
So, Shawn, you had mentioned offline that kind of when you went into the camps, that's when things really escalated in terms of your addiction. What was that like? What happened there and what led you into the camps?
The camp life, I remember I had to clean up for a week or maybe a bit more so I could even get into the camps, because you had to go for a piss test before you could even fly up there. And I mean, I know for me, every single time you came down or you had to do one of those piss tests, you were either going in there with fake urine or you were just cleaning up for that week. And then as soon as you got up there, you were fine. I mean, the drugs ran rampant through the camps, and all the camps, or at least I know they did when I was up there. The whole work scenario in those camps and the pressure, the deadlines, and you're going up there for 21 days straight. You only get 7 days off. You're working your butt off. It doesn't take much if you've already, like if you've got a bit of an addiction, it doesn't take much for it to be around for you to start using it. I remember a few different times waking up in camp and hearing about somebody overdosing in their camp room, and it's those one-offs. Those are the times that it happens.
Yeah. I don't imagine there was a lot of conversation around harm reduction and support. And what about even encouraging guys to, take a look at their addictions, maybe do something about it or talk to someone? Were you hearing or having conversations like that when you're out there?
Absolutely not. I mean, I only wish there was. I was talking with Sam about that earlier, about how, I only wish I had heard or had a little glimpse or into the multitude of things, people, places, and things that there are out there to help people that are struggling. The employer or supervisor needs to be able to be aware and pay attention to their employees and their guys. And I guess openness for them to be able to come forward if they're struggling with either their emotions or physically struggling, or with their addictions. They need to be able to feel comfortable coming forward and asking for help instead of being pushed out into the field and get this done. We need it done. They know that they may even know that you're using it. It didn't matter. They just needed the job done.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I remember I had a job once where, I wasn't doing well, and I was a lead on the job, and I thought I needed to probably head to treatment. Things were disintegrating fairly rapidly, and I did disclose to my employer at the time and told them what was going on, and they said, yeah, no problem. That's great. Can you go to treatment in 6 months after this project is over? Right. So there was no framework or understanding for the urgency. This was pre-fentanyl, the pre-toxic drug poisoning crisis, but there was no understanding of the urgency or the life and death nature of what so many who are struggling with an addiction are facing on a daily basis. The way you're describing the camps sounds very lonely if people aren't connecting and there's no space to be honest or talk with people. What was your experience in that regard?
Well, it was a very lonely setting. I can remember many nights in my camp room alone, and the way it was set up, you weren't really able to go and hang out or, have these places to connect or, meetings at the camps or newsletters or things on bulletin boards about places that people can go or people they can talk with if they're struggling. There was none of that. There was none of that. I don't know what there is now, but I mean, even today on a lot of the job sites I still go to and talk to people on, still really shy, like it's not out there that people should be able to openly go to their employer and be like, hey, look, I'm struggling with this, can you help? And employers need to be able to be there for their guys because they just need to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it sounds to me like a lot of them want to be, and they're learning how right now, but it's still the beginning of this movement. And this is a part of this podcast is hopefully part of that movement in encouraging employers to get the kind of information they need to educate themselves, to create that kind of environment where you can connect. And I am hearing now of some work camps that have counselor or more of a wellness center, I guess, for lack of a better term, on site, and some people access it and some people don't. And since the pandemic, now online counseling is very accessible. It's not for everybody because a lot of us need to co-regulate with the counselor while we're talking to them, but it's better than kick in the head. So some people are starting to access that now on work sites as well. So, and this podcast hopefully is maybe a little bit of a window. And, like I've never worked in work camps, but I know during the lockdown portion of the pandemic, podcast saved me because I felt like I was able to be with my people.
That was Shawn, Daniel, and Karen in Shawn's story. Next up is Aeris' story with Daniel, Aeris, and Karen.
It'll be fine. And I also saw a friend of mine working in New West on a tower, and I yelled up. I was like, "Hey, Chris!" And he looked at me. He was like, "Oh, hey!" And I was like, "Can I have a job?" And then he just laughed, and he says, "Hold up!" Came down there, gave me the number for this company, and it turned out I had a little bit of experience doing rebar before then. So I got a job. I had never been employable, never had a full-time job that I didn't get fired from in the first month, ever.
Wow.
So yeah, I just ended up really bonding with this company and doing reinforcing and steel. And then I got bad Crohn's and I had to have multiple surgeries and dealing with everything that incontinence brings to the job site, which is a lot.
Can you explain for a second what Crohn's is? Because not everybody knows what Crohn's is or the implications of what it does to us with pain and biology.
Sure. I mean, I'll do my best. Crohn's is inflammation from gums to the bum. We don't really know why people get it, but there's probably a genetic factor.
Yep.
But I just started having really bad cramps whenever I would eat, and I started losing a bunch of weight, and I went to gastroenterologist and I got blown off by multiple ones, and until I saw one finally, they gave me a colonoscopy. I actually got to the hospital from work, saw a doctor in the ER. He saw blood there, and he referred me to a gastroenterologist, and I jumped all the hoops, and I had a lot of inflammation down there when I finally got my colonoscopy, which was awesome, by the way. That was that was awesome.
Good times, right?
Great experience.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it. No sarcasm. Get a colonoscopy. It's probably good for you.
Just putting that on my to-do list right now. Thanks.
Yeah, please do. You should. It's really good for you, especially anyone 40 plus, right?
They do often give you fentanyl.
They do.
That's what you get way before your colonoscopy.
Yeah, fentanyl and a short-acting benzodiazepine, midazolam, right? So, just a quick quip: people on the street right now are addicted to general anesthesia. That's what people are doing, but doses in milligrams, not micrograms, right? So, general anesthesia. That's why people are so messed up.
Yeah.
People
Yeah,
are
when
on
you
general
combine
anesthesia.
those substances down and benzos, it does act that way.
Yeah.
It really, people lose track of days and hours. They don't know where they are, what's going on,
Yep.
and this is also why first responders are challenged with overdose response because of the way benzos are interacting with the opioids, and we administer naloxone and people don't.
Yep.
Wake up, right? And so it's a new challenge that we're facing.
It's
I
absolutely.
I just really appreciate the way that you just reframed that and like destigmatized it in that, like, because like obviously if you're going for colonoscopy, you should be getting something to
You have
make
to.
that more
You have to,
comfortable.
dude. Yeah. You
You
have to.
can't do it without it. So,
Yeah.
but that's literally, yeah, people are taking general anesthesia on the
Yes.
streets.
Way
Wow.
higher doses. Way higher
Yeah.
doses, right? They'll give you 120 micrograms of fentanyl and 2 milligrams of midazolam and maybe some sclopamine and something else for your colonoscopy, which they have to give you, by the way, because if they don't, then you'll tighten up and they can't get in there, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, they gotta dope you up real good, especially with the benzo, just to loosen you up. So, gastroenterologist I was seeing at the time, yeah, you have ulcerative colitis, major inflammation in your lower bowels. Here's a course of prednisone. They gave me 30 milligrams of prednisone, 15 milligrams day and night. My face exploded. It's called mood face. Google it. It's wild. I gained a ton of water weight. I also on prednisone for 6 months. It messed me up big time. He also prescribed me Ativan 2 milligrams the entire time I was on prednisone. And I also got put on codeine because I needed it for my incontinence on the job site.
Wow.
And I'm not saying it's a doctor's fault. I needed this stuff. I needed it to function to work. I needed it,
Yeah.
or I poop my pants at work.
Yeah, one of the
all
side effects of opioids, so codeine is an opioid, is constipation, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
that's generally a negative, but in your situation, that was intentional.
Needed it.
That was Aeris' story, part 1. And that's not even the jaw-dropping part of Aeris' story. Check it out on tradespodcast.com. Next up is electrician Jason White's story.
My perspective of my life, like I got lucky. Like I'm dodged literally the addiction bullet that would have killed me. I got ripped out of the way. That's how I feel. Like I feel like I was right in the path of getting hit by this bullet of addiction that was going to kill me.
Yeah.
And I literally got dragged out of the way.
Yeah.
Like right at the like it grazed me. Don't get me wrong. It affected my life, and like, you know, I carry some of that effect with me still today. But what do I do with that?
Yeah.
And like that's kind of part of the reason I wanted to get why I took the opportunity to be part of this podcast was because, like, you know, when I heard like what it was about, and it was like men in trades that are dealing with addiction, dealing with mental health, dealing with the overdose crisis, like I really wanted to get involved. And I really wanted to get involved because of like, I'm a man in trades who had problems with addiction. I've met lots of men and talked to lots of men in trades who had no one else to talk to, that confided in me as their coworker or as their foreman. And I'm the only person they talk to. And they go back and they tell me years later, like, that talk we had in the lockup that day after work, or when you pulled me back and said, we sat down at the table and you said, hey, I said, what's going on? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're like, what's going on? You don't have to tell me, but like, you're different. I can tell what's going on. Like, just tell me. And the guy bursts out into tears,
Yeah.
like right on the table.
Yeah.
And like that talk that we had that day, like changed his life.
Yeah.
Because he was able to talk about it. And like, you know, that was the difference. And like that kind of talk, that's what I want people to have on this podcast. If you don't want to talk, or you can't, or you don't know how, or you don't have anybody, that's why I want people to listen to this podcast and be like, hey, you're not alone. Like, there is tons of other people that have stories just like you. There's other people out there struggling and not talking about it and just trying to stiff upper lip it through their life, because that's what they've been told a man does. He never lets the armor down. He never lets the guard down. He always strong. That's all that there is. And if you can't handle it, you're a pussy, and you need to, you know, man up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And like, yeah, that works great for a long time until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then when it doesn't, right, you end up hearing somebody who's like OD'd, or somebody that's committed suicide. And like, that's another reason I got involved in this. Like, my father-in-law committed suicide in 2020. And I wish I could explain the devastation that suicide does to a family, like just the inner family, but also the rings that are around it. When Mel committed suicide in 2020, you know, he was an alcoholic. He drank every day, and, you know, drinking made him happy. It made his pain go away. It made him not worry about, you know, the stuff in his life that he hated. He was depressed, right? And like, he had been diagnosed with depression. You think you're fine, and then you take the deepest, darkest dip. But like, one night he drank so much that he killed himself. And like, we found out later that like, there had clearly been other attempts and or practice runs and other notes that we found. That made it harder, because we all knew he was out in the shop drinking.
Yeah.
Like, we all saw it for what it was. We talked about it. We said like, we didn't do anything about it, because we do. What would we do? We would tell him to stop drinking. You got to quit that. You got to knock that off. Like, I was at his house looking at an electrical project for his barn the week he died. And like, we planned to do the project, and then we did it that week, like a couple days. And like, I got in my car that day, and I was like, I should go back and talk to him. I should talk to him about, like, you know, the drinking and everything like that. And like, I wanted to go home. I didn't want to sit there and have an hour-long uncomfortable conversation with my father-in-law, who might tell me to shut the fuck up and get out, right? So,
And maybe he wasn't in a place. We actually, the episode we just released today, the day that we're recording this episode, is called Losing Someone to Overdose. And in that episode, Julie Cochran talks about all the what ifs that we play, and that's a regular part of the grief cycle. But I mean, we don't know what
if's not fair. And like, I've said this to my wife over and over again. What if's not fair. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to anybody.
Yeah. So
I don't what if, but instead I say, I wish I would have. I wish I would have got out of the car and talked to him that day. I feel okay wishing that I would have done that, but that might have made absolutely no difference to what happened.
Exactly.
And I'm okay with that. Like, but like, you know, the devastation here's a guy who was sad, clinically depressed, right? Drank every day, addicted to alcohol, so that he could get through the day, and he committed suicide because he had no one to talk to about it.
Yeah.
And even if he had someone to talk to, he had a drinking buddy that came over every day, lived on the property. They drank together every day. They talked sometimes, but like, he came from an era where people didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. And like, he was a farmer. He worked 2 jobs. Right. And like, this is where a lot of tradespeople find themselves, like, where they work so hard every day. They come home, they go to sleep, they get up at 4 a.m, get on the bus, they go to the job site, and then they don't talk about their pain.
Yeah.
They don't talk about their trauma. They use substances just to get through.
You push through it all, physical and emotional pain.
And like, you just sometimes people just give up. And like, I don't know if Mel would he have not killed himself if he had somebody to talk about it, or if he felt like he wasn't so alone, or, you know, if he felt like there was a hope at the end of the tunnel, or like, I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't want anyone to have to go through the stuff that my family and my wife's family have gone through, because we didn't want to address what was, we knew it was a problem. We could clearly see it was a problem. Everybody knew it was a problem. It was like the elephant in the room that nobody talked about.
Yeah.
And like, we didn't want to talk about it. It was uncomfortable. It's still uncomfortable to talk about. But like every Father's Day, every Christmas, every time his birthday passes, it doesn't go away. Like, I'll always be a little mad that he left, that he just went, I'm out.
Yeah.
But I'll also always be a little sad that he felt like he had to. And like, those two things temper each other for me. I'll never get that mad because I'll always be a bit sad, and I'll never get that sad because I'll always be a little mad. Right. And I don't want anyone to ever have to go through that. I want someone to like, just be like, hey, like, it can be better. I promise.
To catch more of Jason's story, go to tradespodcast.com. Next up is Superintendent Summit, featuring Supers Jordan Duncan from Vancouver and Trevor Bakken from Victoria, and CSO Shane Sewell.
Yeah, well, it's definitely getting better within the industry, I think. I think
it is shifting,
bringing a lot more light to the mental health side of things. Movember has helped. It really has, with mental health and having these mental health awareness months. It's all starting to trend in the right direction. But back then, it was so different. That was only 20 years ago when I first started in construction full-time, 21 years ago. And guys would show up hungover and be, oh, I'm just feeling like shit. I'm hungover today. Sorry, I can't get too much work done or whatever. I remember like guys saying this stuff to my dad when I first
we'd work around it.
Oh yeah, he'd be like, okay, well, you know what? Here's the keys to my truck. You go have yourself a sleep, have yourself a nap, and hopefully you'll feel better when you wake up. If you don't, then go home and come back tomorrow and show up better fit, right? And just the mental side of things were way different too back then. It was, I don't know how many times I was told when I was cleaning up garbage around the job site that I'd make a great wife one day.
Totally.
Stuff like that, like the verbal harassment back then was like,
but it was just kind of, part of it, right? Like it was part of the experience. And like, it wasn't even, for me, it wasn't something I toughed out and just got through. Like that actually was part of what I loved. Like I loved that jarring back and forth, and I really fit into that, like I dished out as much as I took in, really, after and I understand it's not this experience for everybody. In those days, it was like a rite of passage, and I felt like I belonged, because it's like, somebody calls you, hey, shithead, and you're like, I got a nickname now, and it didn't hit me hard. Like but looking back, like not everybody, not like a lot of people suffered in that, and at my hands too,
Yeah, huge.
And this idea that we've got to pay our dues, right? And but why? Like my question now is, and I used to live it, right? Like, hey, everybody's got to earn their keep around here. I'm like, why do we have to pay our dues? Like why can't a person just come onto our job site, learn how to do the job safely, put in their time, and go home, collect their paycheck, and enjoy their families? Why do you have to put up with a set amount, somebody else's determined amount of shit and abuse to belong or fit in on this job site, this place of employment?
That's so true. And it's still like that with some people. We still have a lot of people in the industry that are like that. And
that's the challenge for both them and for the next generation. Because I don't know, like what I see is right now an industry that's like this right now. You've got an old guard, my age and older, that are maybe a little younger than me and older, that are like, these young people don't want to work. And these young people are coming in and saying, it's not that. I'm just not going to sacrifice my back, my mind, my whole life for a job. And
that they're not going to take the verbal abuse.
No.
Right.
And they're not wrong. They are not wrong. There is no justifiable reason why that can't be true. And the old guard is being asked to change. And now I have empathy for them, because this is a place that for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. And so now I'm starting not to recognize it. I don't know if you haven't gone through what maybe Shane and I have gone through with, like, feeling uncomfortable and changing, and then it can be very hard.
That's what made it work for me, was because construction, there was a lot of people like me.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and I could relate to these people. And when I met somebody with addiction issues or can't make it on to work on time issues, I could relate to that. It just seems like, you know, it was a safe place. It was the banter. It was the, you know, the camaraderie of working in construction.
And the toughness. Because I knew all those people that used to pick on me growing up, I knew they couldn't last 5 minutes on a job site. And I loved it there, right? Like, so I felt, like I said, it felt like I was part of the underdog story, right? Like, here we are, this motley crew, this rough and tough gangly gang, and we come out here and we hang out and we get each other, we can rip each other, but we, you know, there's a camaraderie, and we do this job that is so physically demanding and emotionally exhausting that other people just can't do, you know? And I always felt like I had one up over the people that sort of, for lack of a better word, abused me growing up, because I knew they had those cushy jobs, or they were, you know, and I'm like, what do you guys know, right?
There's still so many issues with the industry, though. And like you said, the change of the guard with the baby boomers now moving out and the younger generations moving in. I still feel like, I don't want to sound like the old school guy here, but I do feel like there's a lot of work ethic that has to change. You know, Trevor, you were saying that why do people have to earn their due, so to speak, right? But the fact of the matter is that they still do at times, no matter what. Yes, everybody should be able to come and show up to a job site and go to work and learn the job and learn how to do it effectively and safely and productively to make their paycheck, to make the company they're working for a few bucks. Because if they're not making any money, we're not going to have jobs, right?
Always have to accept that. You are working for a company that needs to be profitable.
But at the end of the day, they have to take the time to learn. And it's still a business of, what have you done for me lately? And that's the unfortunate thing about construction. It's never about, oh, this guy's made us tons of money over the last 10 years. It's like, what the fuck did you do last week? Right? Yeah. Like, what? Oh, you fucked up last week and you cost the company $5,000. We don't fucking care anymore that you made us millions of dollars over the last 10 years, right?
Incredible. Like, nobody stops and goes.
And I hate to laugh about it,
seems to have shifted with Mike. Yeah. Maybe we should go and talk to Mike and see what's going on for him.
Yeah. And that's where we as leaders, though, we really have to try to help the guys along with that and help them through things like that, so that they stay, the biggest part is so that they stay mentally stable. Obviously, safety number one. We don't want people getting hurt physically, but the mental aspect of it is quickly becoming number two. We don't want them to suffer mentally, right?
That was Superintendent Summit on tradespodcast.com. Here's losing someone to overdose with self-proclaimed rig pig, Kale Moth, and hypnotherapist Julie Cochran.
Through my journey with recovery, I was given an opportunity that changed my life. And, just to be able to say that was 6 years ago, I just celebrated my 6 years of sobriety.
Congratulations.
On May 7th here. Thank you very much. And the lady here that is with us today, she was a huge part of that. She was part of the family that gave me a chance to have my life back and to be able to go through the Cody Anders Memorial Scholarship Fund and to have a spot in a treatment center to take on life and have a fresh spot to restart and say, you know what, I can grab life and take a hold of it and really move forward and do something positive. And Julie here has been amazing. Even after coming out of treatment, she's stuck beside me every step of the way. There's been good times and hard times, and it's been a blessing the entire way. So thank you again, Julie, for that.
And I can't tell you, this young man, Kale, he's kind of boots on the ground in his community and has made that kind of his mission in life because he's thankful for his own life. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had from him where someone else he's reached out to, whether someone he was just trying to help or someone he's known personally, has lost their life. Like sometimes like 2 or 3 within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's what we had actually when we first recorded Kale's story, and we didn't include it in his actual story at the time. But I remember Kale, you saying that, you actually really needed to come on and talk about your story because you had lost 2 people to overdose or drug poisoning, as I call it, because they're not really overdoses. They're poison drug supply. And you'd lost a 3rd person to suicide that week. And I was just like, holy fuck.
Yeah,
like
that was a rough go. Yeah, I think in the last 5 years, directly like impacting me personally, people I've worked with and friends and people that I consider really close to me. I think we're at like 23 people I've lost now.
23 for you alone.
Yeah, it's bad. Unfortunately, in Saskatchewan here, the numbers have doubled in the overdoses and the accidental drug poisoning, and we don't have any resources. It's being that tough, rugged side of things. People don't want to make that change, and we're losing too many people, and unfortunately there's nothing that's really being done, and that's why I'm trying to advocate so hard for it and work so hard to push for it. And it's unfortunate to see that there's so many young people, especially for myself. I'm only 25 years old, and the people that I've lost are within maximum a 5-year plus or minus of my age. Like that's a lot of young adults to children. Like there's some young people that are taken way too soon from us, and unfortunately the other side of it is only one of them was a female, and that should speak volumes as to what it's kind of stating towards men. Like why is it ruled out to that point, is where men are struggling so badly and they're battling their demons, and there's nothing that they feel like they can do to reach out for help, and the opportunity, they aren't getting clear enough, or just seems that the doors are maybe closed in front of them. They don't have a step forward, and the pain and struggle they go through, and the only option is to try and cure it with some false happiness, some sense of joy, and they turn to the wrong place, and unfortunately it's taking all of them away from us.
And Julie, you also professionally, you work in the psychology industry as well, correct?
Well, yeah, I work in mental health. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I've kind of come full circle. Psychology was my background, but I went into the business world. But Cody's, my stepson's, my son, we don't use the word step in our family. His journey led me back to kind of where I began my roots, and was a big piece of why I do the work I do, especially because I wanted to work with young men who struggled with mental health. We all know the stats of, how many men to women pass due to drug harms. And there's a reason for that. We don't make it socially acceptable for our boys, our men, our young men to raise their hand and say, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
Right. And So I wanted to be part of the upstream solution. And I'm also part of Mom Stop the Harm. And, I've learned so much over the last 6 years. And Cody passed April 1st, 2018. I was starting to learn before he passed, but I wish I knew then what I know now.
So many things in there that I'd love to follow up on. One of them is just thank you for being a hypnotherapist, because it's an alternative form of therapy, maybe a little bit different from regular talk therapy. And one of the things that has come up as a theme in season 2 of this podcast was that there's few services that feel accessible to men in the trades and young men in general. And a lot of the mental health services that do exist are more clinical settings, and they're just such a different world and such a different culture than where most young men and or men in the trades are at. They just can't connect to those services, or they find they have great difficulty connecting to them. So
or they don't feel safe within it, right?
Yeah.
And like a lot of men, a lot of them that I work with, they just want to get to the other side of whatever they're struggling with quickly.
Yeah.
And I fully value talk therapy. My daughter, Nicole, is a psychologist. She works in the VA down in Las Vegas. And unfortunately, she can't join us tonight, but I think you're going to interview her and, maybe a few weeks down the road.
Yeah, we are.
This is the one she wrote about our journey, our family journey, her journey, Cody's journey.
Yeah. 100 Goodbyes, it's called. And I actually just read it a couple days ago, and I was so moved by it. And I really appreciate, I felt like I really got a glimpse into who Cody was, and just so much appreciated. She's a clinical psychologist and is struggling through her grief journey. She knows everything you need to know.
Knows it all, right?
Yeah.
And I remember when her first day, she was supposed to go back to work after Cody passed a couple of weeks afterwards. And she FaceTimed me because she was sitting in her car in the parking lot and in tears and saying, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
We talked about it. She goes, I don't want to go in there and have everyone look at me weird and just say the things that I don't want to hear today. And we both decided, it'd be great if we could have a t-shirt that just said, I'm not okay today. And that's okay. Right?
Oh my God, yes. Somebody market this t-shirt.
It's like it's something to take the pressure off everybody from having to say something, right?
Yeah. To hear more on losing someone to overdose, go to tradespodcast.com. And if you're interested in hypnotherapy, try visiting juliecochran.com. To clarify any confusion, Off the Clock Toolbox Talk has Shane Taylor's story from Season 2, Shawn's story from Season 3, and what you're about to hear is CSO Shane's story from Shane Sewell.
Only later on, once my dad was basically having trouble keeping jobs, drinking excessively, that's really when things started to change. And I'd say I was probably around maybe 8 years old at that point. We kicked around a lot. My dad really couldn't hold a job. He was a very, well-educated. He was the first one in his family to ever go to university. He worked in construction as well, designing buildings, that kind of stuff. So, he had a very good job, and we had a very comfortable life in the beginning. It wasn't really until like I say, till I was about 8, where things started to really go downhill. I had flunked grade 3, and they were really wondering why that happened. And it turned out that I was completely deaf in my right ear.
Wow.
So no one really ever knew till, I started going to doctors and figuring this out.
Yep.
So essentially, my eardrum had blown, and nobody knew. I guess you would think I would be complaining of, pain and all kinds of problems, but it was never discovered until later.
Yeah, kids
So
don't always notice stuff like that. That's why we
yeah,
have to watch them so closely, is because they don't always notice stuff like that. So, wow,
yeah,
that's big though.
in crowds, or just trying to have a conversation with somebody with background noise,
Yep.
that kind of problem. That was a big part of, I think, a lot of my issues really at the time. I was feeling kind of picked on. The hearing problem was definitely an issue for me. I felt really isolated. I started to withdraw. The friends that I had, I was slowly starting to detach from that. And then, what was going on at home. At one point, I remember, going to like family events were always the scariest part for me. My father was a very verbal, very angry drunk when it came to family events. So I was always on edge, what's going to happen next? We'd go for like Christmas or something to my grandma's house. It was just torture for me. I just remember just being in horror, always trying to be in damage control. And, I was just a young kid, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
So,
that's what we
that
call
was a
trauma.
real tough. Yeah. Yeah. So that was really when, I started to realize that, this was a real serious problem that my father had. I never realized how much it affected me until I got with close family. And just realized, how broken the relationship was, between my father and the rest of our family. Those were real tough times for me. And that's where I think, a lot of my problems that flared up later with addiction kind of originated there. I was dead against alcohol because, I saw what it had done to my dad and, some other family members. I was just a mess, but obviously at that age, it was more just mental illness. I was going through, not having many friends, scared to make friends. It was a horrible time for me, really.
Yeah, really traumatic.
Like I keep thinking when I'm listening to your story about how for me there probably would have been a sense that I was different everywhere. Like I was different than the people at school. When my family went places because of my father, I was different. I don't know. Did you feel like the spotlight was on you, kind of like you didn't fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I always felt that. I'd say once, I was 8 to 10 years old, I really started to come back on how am I making this worse? Am I the reason why this is happening? There's a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty about this is my fault.
And we always blame ourselves, but particularly kids blame themselves when they have some kind of trauma going on around them, even if parents are having a relatively stable, happy divorce, kids still blame themselves for what's going 100%. On. So that's what we do as human beings.
And and the other thing that's coming up for me when I listen is like, we often think about trauma and we think about its impact on us as individuals, but a lot of the times, like we forget that this trauma was sort of taken on by an 8-year-old version of us. It's like any one of these things for an adult who's seen a few things to go through is one thing, but you put yourself back in an 8-year-old body and mind, and the damage was done then to an 8-year-old self, right? Like it's, I often forget, like even when I sit with peers sometimes, I have to remind myself, this didn't happen to them now in their current form. This happened to a child, right? And it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, for sure.
That was Shane Sewell, Trevor Botkin, and Karen in CSO Shane's Story. Closing us out, overdose survivor Aeris Finch ties us up with some hard-earned words of wisdom from Aeris' story, part 2.
I'm just wondering, is there like a message that you would want to leave people with?
Yeah, I think the only thing I can say is be kind to that person on the street who you may not take to immediately, who might be acting irrationally because you don't know what caused that behavior. You don't know if they're having a bad day. You don't know what symptoms they have. And sometimes one moment of kindness can honestly save a life. I think that everyone should be kind to one another. I don't know that message is spread far and wide, and it's taken into, like, be kind to one another, everyone, see you later. It's a tagline, but like, I genuinely believe being kind and generous with your time to people who you might not even know could ultimately save a life.
Yeah. It might save your life, actually, like your own life, when you're kind to other people.
Yep, that's NA. That's like the doctrine of NA, right? I think that if you are seeking help for substance use and you don't like how you're feeling, and just talk to your doctor. And if you aren't getting anywhere with your doctor, there's other doctors. We're in a socialized medical system. And you can ask for another doctor. You're not stuck. Like, I'm just afraid to ask for help. I'll just like sit there and be meek and passive, but you don't need to be. You don't need to be. If you don't like how you're being treated, advocate for yourself. Do your best anyways, because I know it can be really hard.
Yeah.
And if your family member is suffering, be there, love them, learn how to use the Loxone, and learn about how much death that this crisis has wrought, because it's astronomical. And if you're in the room or a building with someone that you love and they go down, you might want to think twice about kicking somebody onto the street. If my parents kicked me onto the street, I'd be dead.
Yeah.
If my wife left me, I'd be dead. So if you can get through and you see a light anywhere, just go towards it. Not if you're dying, but that light is a metaphor, for just love, right?
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Really, that's amazing.
That was Aeris Finch, Daniel Snyder, and Karen Jansen in Aeris' story, part 2. You can hear Aeris' incredible story in part 1 and part 2 and all the episodes you've heard in the season 3 sampler at tradespodcast.com or wherever you catch your podcasts. Off the Clock Toolbox Talk has been a Fraser House Society project, executive produced and co-hosted by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution from Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. Special shout out to ICBA Wellness for partnering with Off the Clock Toolbox Talk to get the wellness word out there in a way that works for the world of construction. Visit icba.ca/wellness. Help save lives. Go to tradespodcast.com and click on the link under Enter to win a $200 grocery card. When you fill out the survey, you help us understand what's working and what's not. Each survey for each episode listened to is a separate entry. Information collected is for survey purposes only and is not shared. Help us, help you.